Hello and a very warm welcome back to the Rugby Paper podcast. With French teams ripping through opposition in the Champions Cup at the weekend, as well as South African teams being eliminated completely, there's plenty to scrutinise on the Champions Cup front. The Six Nations is also 10 days away, and with the home nations hit by injuries, there's plenty to discuss in this one. Loads to discuss today. Last week's England squad reaction and Nico Matawalu's special appearance is definitely worth a listen. So do have one if you haven't. It was one of the madder hours I've spent on this podcast. Today we did have a Leicester Tigers player lined up to come on. Understandably, after they got hosed by Toulouse at the weekend, he wanted to take the week to regroup. Heaps to discuss in terms of Champions Cup, but obviously Six Nations just 10 days away, and we also had an England winger's retirement just this past week. Brendan and Nick are with me. Nick, Happy New Year, your first appearance of 2025. Have you just woken up from your hibernation, basically?
Yep, you could say that. Yep, but raring to go.
Well, I'll throw you in the deep end with Anthony Watson. It wasn't necessarily unexpected, was it? But a great shame that a career was curtailed in the way it was, because for 4 or 5 years, he was electric with England and one of the first names on the team sheet.
Yeah, I mean, quite a prolific strike rate and tremendous athlete. He seemed to be, his career towards the end was truncated by injuries to quite a large extent. But we saw, when he came through and clinched a place on that 2017 Lions tour in the Test side, we really started to see what he was capable of, not just for England, but at that really rarefied level, and how dangerous he was. He was electrifying, really. At times his pace was unbelievable, but also his ability to find gaps. And the combination of he and Johnny May for a long time gave England real strike power at a time where they were up and down in the latter period of the Eddie Jones era. But yeah, a great loss, and another example of the fact that nobody gets to go out, or very few people get to go out of the game in the way in which they would like to, and that's certainly been the case with Anthony.
Yeah, it was quite harrowing in the way he described his last game. It was at Sale Sharks, where he basically said he was sharing a room with Andre Pollard, and his back was in so much pain that he woke up that night, 4 a.m., laced himself with painkillers, and just had to soldier on. And I didn't actually watch that game, I'll confess, but I'd imagine he was a pedestrian for most of it. And it's a shame to see a player who tore defenses to shreds. That game against Scotland in the Six Nations springs to mind as one. Brendan, Nick mentioned pace, and you and I were just speaking off air about England speedsters or lack of in relation to some of our backs at the moment. Anthony Watson had the ability to stop and start almost on cue, which meant that you always had the feeling in a one-on-one he could get round his man.
Well, yeah, I mean, he was a terrific athlete, and he had that also, not just stopping starting, he had that rare ability, which only a few have, as sort of accelerating into the sidestep, which sort of doubles the effectiveness of it. So it's like he sort of slingshots out of the sidestep. And I mean, if you think he had not one but 2 Achilles go, you might get back from one, you don't get back from 2. And who knows? I dare say that has jigged up the back, that causes back problems. It all starts building, and he's still only 30. So the last 3 years, he's done incredibly well to play any rugby. So if you consider what he could have done and what he could have achieved, but also mark what he did actually achieve. He was 2 Lions tours, 50 odd England caps, some great moments. Also a reminder of what a nursery London Irish has been. I know Jacko did a big feature at the weekend, didn't he, of the London Irish players who were with the club when they went pop and how well they're doing. But London Irish have fed the English system for about 15, 20 years, that academy. And he was, one of their premier products. So really nice guy. I hope it hasn't been so harrowing that he hasn't got something in mind for post-career. When it finishes like this and all your focus has been on keeping going, recovering, playing, and suddenly it's over, it can be difficult, I would imagine. You're not planning for your retirement. Hopefully he's getting some help. Hopefully he's got something in mind. He seems a bright guy, so fingers crossed on that.
100%. I mean, it was 2 Achilles, ruptured ACL as well, and now the back problem.
He had the full works, yeah.
All that Achilles is 6 months at least per. I can't remember the exact timelines. ACL.
And you never quite come back with the spring and the gas.
No,
that you always lose 5% from an Achilles.
Yeah, and obviously it curtails. We're talking about 5 years off his career, presuming he could have had another 3 or 4.
Yeah.
That's the difference between another 30 caps potentially. So he could have been a near 100 capper with 40 England tries, and all of a sudden he's in the same conversation as Rory Underwood. And I think he was that good. He was that good. It's like you say, a great shame. Good flag for London Irish as well, because I think people often forget that pre-Bath, that was actually where he was birthed.
Yes. Lots of people came from London Irish.
100%. Guys, obviously his current club Leicester also had a tough time of it at the weekend. I should probably say, as a general warning, and this is more me predicting how this conversation is going to go, if you're listening for much positive to be said about the Champions Cup, I'm pretty sure this won't be the episode for you. But it was one of the craziest Champions Cup rounds, or even group stage rounds of any rugby tournament I can think of. Some freakish results, some upsets as well, which obviously were nice to see in a way. But let's talk about the 2 headline games, which were Toulouse and Bordeaux, and what they did. We'll go in reverse order. Brendan, what do you make of it all? I mean, they both averaged 55 points throughout the group stages, but both went up at the weekend.
In that respect, I'm not for these basketball scores, but I am for virtuosity. And we discussed a while back, are Toulouse the best club side in the world? Well, they are. No, they are the best club side in the world. Are they the best team in the world? Could they beat the Springboks? And I think I suggested they could. And this kind of emphasizes in my mind that they are playing rugby on a different planet when they want to, when they turn it on. Actually, I'm going to correct myself there. Toulouse used to be a little bit mercurial. They played just when they wanted to. This Toulouse turn it on week after week after week. And that's basically, I think, because Dupont turns it on week after week after week. He never allows his standards to drop. So, astonishing performance from them. I remember midway through the first half thinking, Leicester hadn't done an awful lot wrong, and they were already 30 points down. If you're not at that level, you can't contain it. My other thought from that match was Jack Willis, 6 turnovers. Bloody hell. Why can he not be playing for England? Why can this man not be playing for England? I saw an interview with Thierry Dustot. He's absolutely astonished that England won't make any sort of exception to get him in the team.
Yeah.
And then over at Bordeaux, Damien Penaud. It's a shame that Chewy isn't here today. I think Damien Penaud would be Chewy's love child of choice. I mean, he's a fabulous player, isn't he? And he gifted one. He could have had 7. He basically scored a 7th and gave it to the other bloke.
He could have had 7. He did the same last week as well, so he could have 13 tries in 2 games.
And they went 12. They went 2 tries down. Sharks turned up for the first 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And he thought, hello, but don't poke the bear. In France, don't poke the bear because it'll come back at you.
I don't know. I mean, my read on it is sort of more oblique in a sense, because what I see is a failure of the Premiership. And I thought, as a corollary to that, the game between Northampton and Munster was a classic. I thought it was a fantastic game of rugby, and showed, an aspect of the Premiership which we don't see anywhere near enough of, which is a side that was prepared to dog it out and tackled. And one of the biggest problems is that Premiership clubs are monumentally inconsistent, and that's even been the case with Northampton this season. But we saw Saracens go down to a very, very good Castra second team, but they were effectively a second team.
Yeah.
And to do that at home is a shocker for Saracens, and really puts them in jeopardy having to go away. to Toulon in the round of 16. So, I mean, for me, these collapses, I mean, Leicester going down by 80 points. I don't care how good Toulouse are. You know, if you're a professional rugby side with, you know, a decorated coach in Michael Checker, that is a pretty pretty resounding crash. And it doesn't speak well of the Premiership because, you know, we've got the two top teams in the Premiership, admittedly in one of the strongest pools, you know, go out of the tournament in Bath and Bristol. You know, I mean, Bristol gave a good account of themselves in Claremont, but Claremont are a mid-table top 14 side at the moment. You know, I mean, the gap between the two leagues, and I get fed up with all this stuff about, oh, the Prem clubs haven't got the money and so on and so forth. They got marquee players in there. You know, Finn Russell's on apparently £1 million a year. You know, so the idea that the Premiership clubs are absolutely hamstrung by the gap. Look at New Zealand sides; they don't have any money at all compared to the money sloshing around in Europe. Yet their standards, they drive their standards high all the time. I'm afraid that certainly the defensive standards in the Premiership and the overall consistency of Premiership clubs at the moment is pretty lamentable.
I wouldn't argue with much of that. And I'm like you. I'm a big critic of the format of this competition and where it's going. There were some good matches, though. I mean, I watched Benetton La Rochelle, and that was a belter. That was a belter. And Benetton at the end put in the best defensive set I've seen in years to bring that win home. So that was outstanding. Northampton was a very good match. I really enjoyed that. That was just proper Euro giants going at it each other. First 60 minutes of Quins Leinster was pretty good until, not Quins, Bath Leinster. And I don't think the sending off actually affected the result, but it certainly affected the winning margin and took the steam out of Bath. But that was pretty good for the first hour. Had a lot of crunch to it. So I thought it was a better weekend of European rugby, except for those two extraordinary results, which, yeah, I was wearying of watching it by the end, brilliant as it was.
Am I overanalyzing? Sorry, Nick. Am I overanalyzing to say that this weekend is a sort of microcosm for the issues that the cup has? And that, like you say, you have those core fixtures that do draw the eyes, that do get the sort of, you know, the rave reviews in terms of quality of a fixture itself. But then you've got the extreme of, like Nick says, the inconsistency of Premiership sides relative to the French rugby giants, and the gap is getting bigger. I mean, the points difference between the sort of Prem versus top 14 head-to-heads must be sickening reading from an English point of view. Plus, obviously, the South African elephant in the room, which we obviously haven't mentioned. But the core product, there is still very much potential to tap into it. It's just obviously finding ways to engineer that in a way that, you know, French rugby knows how to get the best out of their teams in this tournament. It seems that we don't, and the South Africans certainly don't.
I'm not even sure the South Africans try, do they?
No, they don't. They don't. And I
don't know why they're in the competition.
But they don't have the depth that the French teams have. I mean, no one has the depth the French teams have, but they don't even have the Premiership team level of depth. And so that rotation that's necessary. These Springbok teams are playing 10 months with their clubs, and then July through to November with the nation. So they're essentially playing 14-month years, basically. You need to be able to rotate.
Yeah, I think you do, but the logistics of the two competitions, the URC and the European Cup, are all over the shop. And the fact that the South African sides, the travel factor is, even though it's same time zone and so on and so forth, is clearly a problem for everybody. But it can be ameliorated by having what you could call sort of small tours, where they go where people are going either north or south for 2 or 3 weeks and seeing fixtures through, and that just is something that's been completely overlooked. And the South Africans do have to sort themselves out. They sort the entrance into the European Cup. They seem to be prioritising the URC mainly, and they've got to sort out their act, because the European Cup has always been the premium competition in the Northern Hemisphere. It's in danger of losing that completely, and the last 2 or 3 seasons since the format change have really shown that very starkly. And
another couple of things that irritate me in the format, in fact, the whole format irritates me greatly. But even right at the end, the minutiae, Benetton finished level 11 points, La Rochelle. Now, in any league that I've ever heard of, when you do that, it's the result in the match between the two teams that counts. La Rochelle should be a second-ranked team and get a home draw. No, sorry, Benetton should be they should be the second ranked. They should be getting the home draw. But for some reason, they flipped it the other way around. La Rochelle are the second ranked team. And like they've done it on points difference, but that only works if you're playing the same opponents. How can you do it on points difference if you're not playing the same opponents? And then you've got Ulster getting through with 1 win and 5 points in the league table. Racing not getting through with 2 wins and 9 points in their league table in as hard a pool. So all of that is really unsatisfactory. And it comes from trying to tinker, and you just get it wrong time after time.
I mean, that's a really good point, that points difference piece, especially as, Bordeaux and Toulouse didn't play each other. So imagine if it came down to that. And obviously, both of their points difference is ridiculous. But
points difference is irrelevant if you're not playing the same opponents in the pool and you've got the same criteria.
But we've had these anomalies now for the last 3 years, and they've resisted doing anything about it. And it's another example of how poor administration can cripple a sport. Because at the moment, this competition, it's been a fantastic competition. We still see breakouts of it with a game like Northampton Munster. But it used to be that every pool had games like that on them on a consistent basis. And
you could understand it instantly.
Yeah.
Comprehend it instantly.
Absolutely. So it's been, and I mean, this is sort of rugby self-harm.
Yeah. I read somewhere, and I cannot remember where, that some of the games had a bigger attendance in stadiums than they did through online viewership as well. And that's borderline a crisis, if that is true. And don't quote me on it directly, but I think for some games at least it's close. So not only do we have a product that obviously varies in terms of its entertainment factor, because like we say, basketball scores isn't entertaining rugby as good as Damien Penaud is. People watch it for contests, but also a product that isn't as accessible, or people also aren't that motivated to access it. So it's a catch-22 really at the moment. I think we should probably, just to go back to Damien Penaud, 6 tries, 2 assists out of 10 tries in the team, 11.5 meters per carry, 200 meters in total, 6 line breaks, 5 defenders beaten. I was listening to Chris Ashton talk on the BBC podcast, and I think he's got the European try record in the 40s. Penaud's on 23, but at this rate, Penaud could overtake him in 3 matches. So Chris seemed quite calm. I wouldn't be, to be honest.
By the way, if we're talking brilliance over the weekend, I'm going to put a hand up for Ange Capuzzo. My God, 91 meters, 10 defenders beaten. And he only scores beautiful tries, doesn't he? His tries, when he scores them, are always works of art. So he looks in good nick. And Italy must be praying he doesn't pick up a knock or hasn't picked up a knock. Because they didn't get full value out of him last year in the Six Nations, did they? He got crocked second or third match, I think it was. Yeah. If he can stay fit, that would be a big boon to them.
Yeah. I mean, another player who's made a huge impact, I think. Not just in the Premiership, but he's really come through. I mean, that try-saving tackle that he pulled off coming off the bench for Northampton is Pollock. Yeah. He is on fire at the moment. His contribution for them has been phenomenal. Even in the loss at Stade Francais, the week before, he was outstanding in that game as well. So, I mean, I see he's just been called into, and we're going to go in that direction shortly, I guess. But he's just been called into the England squad. But the oversight of leaving him out in the first instance, I couldn't understand. When you have a player, I don't care how old he is, and he's just turned 20, I think. When you have a player who's playing like that and is influencing games at the highest level like that, you have got to give them their head. You've got to let them go. I mean, get the guy into the squad at the very, very least so that you can measure the speed. His speed around the field is phenomenal.
Yeah.
He's ever present, and I think that at the moment he'd leave most of the England sevens. We talk about us having great depth and so on and so forth, but he's a street ahead in his speed to the ball and his speed around the pitch.
He reminds you of an early Tom Curry before the weight got to him.
He's quicker than Tom ever was, I'd say. He's probably quicker than most England backs if you're actually going to nail it down to that. But I was a little bit more relaxed. Not relaxed. I saw no reason not to have him in the squad, but I wasn't seeing any reason to rush him into the starting 15. I mean, I've been watching him really closely this season because, unlike some, I've been writing about him for 2 years, not 2 months or 2 weeks. He is one of the most amazing talents I've seen. But I've been watching him, and he does go quiet a bit for 10, 15 minutes in a match. He's got the best highlights reel in the Premiership, but he does go a bit quiet. He's not quite the finished product. I just wondered, you can't go quiet for 10, 15 minutes in Dublin against Ireland. I just wondered if that went against him. But within 6 months, he will be the full bore, the full product, and probably one of the best flankers England have ever had.
I mean, look, if you talk about England flankers going quiet, I'd say that he's in terms of the work he's getting through. I mean, he's getting through more than the people in the seven contention in the squad at the moment. His work rate, I think, by comparison with most of them, is phenomenal.
Yeah.
I mean, Ben Curry's been playing very well, and you have to give him credit for that. And I think he's ahead of his brother at the moment going into the ranking on their.
Yes, Ben's ahead of Tom without question.
Without a shadow of a doubt. Ben Earl, I don't know. I don't think that Ben Earl has benefited from this yo-yoing between eight and 7. I think that he needs to play in the position, particularly with the competition coming through from people like Pollock. He needs to be at his absolute best.
Yeah.
And he needs to decide what position he is at.
Yeah. And that position is not number 8 in my view.
Well, not if Tom Willis continues apace as well. Well, we had this conversation last week, wasn't it? The back row is incredibly complicated for England in many ways, unless Borthwick knows exactly what he wants.
But we've got a broader complication as well here, don't we? In that obviously Ben Earl is being picked out of position, and it was fine when it worked, but for the past sort of 6 months, since the summer really in New Zealand, it hasn't worked. That's a problem. I'm obviously reading stuff about Marcus Smith being fielded at 15, Freddie Stewart moved to the wing. That's another 2 cases of players who aren't playing where they are for their clubs. Henry Slade is being given the 12 shirt where he's never played before in his career, really, maybe once or twice. Ollie Lawrence, if he's not, Ollie Lawrence is being given the 12 shirt. So actually, there's still this complete disconnect between what England are looking to do with their players and what the clubs are looking to do with their players. Yeah,
and whether those who've got hybrid contracts have to be in the England 23 as well. I mean, there are so many, big question marks over what's going on, selection-wise, in particular, and what impact these hybrid contracts are having, because it will become pretty obvious when players who are not in form but have hybrid contracts are being shoehorned into the 23.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, my feeling is that we're talking about what Steve Borthwick wants from his back row, what Steve Borthwick wants from England. Because at the moment, if you look at the midfield, that's not balanced or not. There's no surety about which way they want to go. If you look at the back row, there's no real clarity about the way in which they want to go. If you look at the front row, hobby horse time, but if you look at the front row, there is, again, that it's sort of fractured all over the place. Jamie George is injured. I don't know whether he would be the starting hooker now, or
who is the starting hooker, Nick?
Well, I mean, Cowan Dickey for me at the moment. I think
he'll pick. Yeah,
I think that over the, I mean, he clearly had a real lapse for over quite a long period when he over that time when the Montpellier contract went belly up and so on. He had injuries, and that seemed to affect him a great deal. But this season, he's come back into his own. And England need the sort of ballast that he offers in the front row.
Yeah.
Because the rest of the front row is, by comparison with some of the teams that they're going to come up against, they've got a hell of a lot to prove. Personally, I'd be looking at putting Fajur at loosehead.
Yeah.
Because I'm just not convinced by what England are, what England are doing. Ellis Genge is sort of in and out of the Bristol team. He doesn't seem to play, as regularly as you might like. And that goes for quite a lot of the front row forwards. I mean, the idea that England are still sort of playing around with the concept of whether, front row forwards should be able to play for 80 minutes or not strikes me as, they're not alone. But I think that the South Africans, for example, I think that most of them at a push, Oxenche included, Malherbe included, could do an 80-minute stint. I begin to wonder whether that's the case with any of the England front rows.
Not sure Oxenche would thank you for saying that and signing him up to it. But
I think he'd be delighted. But I think he can do it. I mean, he's pretty mobile. He's pretty mobile.
Yeah.
So Ollie, what are you hearing on the Freddie Stewart, Marcus Smith thing? Because I mean, obviously, there's lots of debate about it. But that should be firming up, perhaps in a few quarters here.
No, I read this in the Guardian that Steve Borthwick in an interview had said that he was thinking about it. I think it's more of a Dublin plan than a Six Nations plan, in particular. And I suppose it would mean, obviously, defensively, when Freddie Stewart plays 15, oppositions don't take to the skies anymore. I think it's plain and simple that's not the tactic. Freddie Stewart that's his strength. He's slower on the turn with little kicks in behind. And obviously, we've seen his defensive frailties. We saw them at the weekend. I think the feeling is to deploy him in attack in a way that we did in Paris in 2022.
Yeah.
When we put him on the wing, through hopefully Alex Mitchell's box kicking, having him on the wing as a way of tapping into that strength, and also he doesn't get left, so defensively exposed too, which I see. But then obviously you're playing him out of position, and you're playing Marcus Smith at fullback, which he's played there twice this season for Quins maybe, and so I don't know. It's speculation, obviously. But I would almost rather that, I think, than have Freddie Stewart at fullback, to be honest.
I mean, Marcus is he's no faint heart in defence. He tackles, no question about it. But he's not. He's got no heft, really. So the idea that he is going to be significantly better defensively than Freddie Stewart, and that we should stick Freddie Stewart on the wing, I think is barking. Freddie Stewart is his best position is definitely fullback. He does have, he is not the fastest on the turn, that's for sure. But I don't believe that a bloke who plays there week in, week out and has played well for England in the 15 shirt, that's important. I can't remember him having a really duff game for England.
Oh, I can.
Can you? Okay.
Yeah, South Africa in the autumn and New Zealand in the summer. South Africa in the autumn is maybe a little bit harsh. New Zealand in the summer, he was exposed for 2 of their tries.
Right.
And I absolutely agree with you in that he's had good games.
Yeah, I thought that Furbank was there in the summer.
Started the first test and then he got injured, and Freddie Stewart started the second. Look, I just think teams obviously have figured him out, which is why this came about in the first place. And he's been told to work on his pace, but there's only so much you can do that, and you either have it or you don't. And in terms of Furbank being a lot, England have had a few losses. Faye will go, so Furbank, potentially Mitchell, Jamie George. I think Furbank's up there because obviously he's the link. He dictates the way England's backline plays in a way that Marcus Smith actually doesn't to the same extent.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that Stewart offers no attacking threat, I don't buy into that at all. Certainly early on, he scored some pretty good tries for England. And he's a very, given his size, when he does get motoring, he's difficult to stop, and he's certainly very difficult to stop in the 22 if he's if he's 10 meters from the line or something like of that sort. Very difficult to stop indeed. So I don't see him as a sort of an attacking passenger necessarily, and I certainly think that putting him on the wing, which is where you do want gas, real gas. Is you're sort of up one of your strike positions basically. So I would definitely play him at fullback. I wouldn't countenance playing Marcus Smith at fullback. Marcus Smith should be the starting 10.
In that case, I tend to agree with you, Nick. In that case, you need the 2 England wings to be much more proactive defensively. And actually, Roebuck is brilliant in the air. Funnily enough, I don't remember him too much defensively in the air, but he's brilliant in the air attacking. Perhaps he needs to take on more responsibility. And both the wings need to not be covering for Stewart, but they need to be aware that they could do more. There are going to be balls which they should be taking and not Stewart. And that takes a bit of communication between the back three.
And who's the other wing? Is the other wing Tommy Freeman? It seems like the outside centre option for Freeman seems to have gone blowing in the wind. Yet another season, another Six Nations.
I know. But this is the thing, right? Is where's the arch finisher? Where's the genuine speedster in a back three of Freddie Stewart, Tom Roebuck, and Tommy Freeman? They're all very good.
I think Freeman's pretty quick. I think
But Brendan, he scored 2 tries in 16 tests for England. Ollie Little overtook that in his first 2. Ollie Little is an arch.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a cheap stat, isn't it? I mean, anybody could have run in. Not anybody, but you know what I mean. If he'd been lucky enough to be there, Tommy Freeman would have run those in.
Oh, look,
I think Freeman always looks dangerous, ball in hand, to me, and he always makes ground. Listen, we haven't seen his very best, but I think he will suddenly have a match where he gets a hat trick. Freeman.
Yeah, I mean Freeman's high ball take against New Zealand in the summer, where he did, where he scored one of his 2 tries in 16 games or whatever, was outstanding. I mean,
fantastic.
Listen, he's a terrific player. He is not, his full range of what he can do is not being explored properly by
not remotely.
I'm not arguing against his inclusion. I'm just saying in terms of balance of that back three and the way we want to play. You've got 2 aerial maestros in Tommy Freeman and Freddie Stewart, and then Tom Roebuck is obviously very strong in the air as well. All of a sudden, the take to the skies approach that we're trying to move away from almost seems an inevitability then.
Well, we might be trying to move away from it, but Steve Borthwick's got to pick the team to beat Ireland in Dublin. I suspect he's already seen a bit of a theme there.
I mean, and players are, the idea that, neither Freeman nor Roebuck are dangerous attacking wings, when the ball's in hand is wrong. They're both very dangerous attacking wings, I think. My issue is that Freeman has not been given a shout at outside centre. I don't understand it. And the bloke who offers probably the most gas on the wing at the moment is Slitehome. So he would be with Murley perhaps next.
So that's what I'm not. They obviously have attacking threat. Tom Roebuck showed it when he came off the bench against Japan. He was fantastic. Freeman has showed it in an England shirt. All I'm saying is they're not necessarily X factor arch finishers in the way that a Slightholme is, or a Murley is starting to show that he is again, having come back from. And so I would love to see an England back line with one. And I think that's a much better balance of a back three. I think Ollie Slightholme's carrying a knock.
I think he must be. I've been wondering where he has the last couple of weeks.
Which makes it interesting.
I haven't heard any word officially, but
yeah, so we'll have to see on that one. And I'd love to see Caden Murley given a go, if not, because he's looking back to the peak of his powers. The balance of the back three is interesting, and I know that this is going to be a Six Nations where we debate England's selection intensely. I can already sort of feel it on my own behalf. Before we get carried away, I just want to sort of circle back to South African involvement in the Champions Cup, because I think it probably is worth outlining the trajectory it was on and now is. In the first 2 years, South African teams, did not lose home games. That's maybe indicative of an issue as well in terms of the impact, because obviously none of them made a semi-final at any point. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm thinking back to 22. Anyway, they didn't lose home games, and they had a points difference of 27 points for, 35 against on average, to 26 for, 32 against for the Bulls and the Stormers, and that was moving up. This year has been a total capitulation of that, to the point where everyone and your granddad is speaking out against it. Antoine Dupont is questioning if it makes sense, and if he questions it, then best believe France listen. Where do we actually go from here? Because I think this is probably, this is 3 years now, to the point where if it's not improving now, will it? If not, change has to be made. So what is the change now?
Well, I don't see that being members of the URC and competing in that, which I think over a season makes a little bit more sense. You can do these travel blocks that Nick was talking about, and vice versa. The incoming team to South Africa can clock off 2 or 3 matches down there. I don't see why participation in that automatically means you get to enter the European Cup.
Yeah,
I just don't see that. It doesn't have to be. And if they don't want to be in it, and if there's no mileage in it, don't do it. You can be in the URC, go and do something else during the European Cup weekend.
I mean, look,
if the box players are overplayed, enjoy the rest.
Yeah,
I think that I think that one of the issues is that the European Cup is now, all these competitions are ruled by broadcast money. So Supersport in South Africa, I think, bring quite a lot to the broadcast, table one way or the other. And I just, but if the crowds and if the broadcast numbers in South Africa don't hold up, you can rest assured that they will, the broadcasters will start looking around for a new solution. Now, the one that we've heard about, which is the one that concerns me most, is the idea that the European Cup every 4th year will become a sort of staging post for qualification for a World Club Championship.
Yeah,
and because that would be the real death knell of the European Cup as the jewel in the crown of European club rugby. So, yeah, I mean, I do think that the South African nettle has to be grasped. I don't know that cutting them adrift in terms of their role in the game going forward, having made a commitment to them, whether it was the right commitment or the wrong, is the right thing to do now. I don't think that there's much more appetite in South Africa for them to go back into what is a Super Rugby mishmash at the moment, which is also, in many respects, if not dying on its feet, certainly not getting people particularly energized. So it's a difficult one, very difficult indeed.
If they stay in the URC, that's already more matches than they ever played in Super Rugby. That is the basis of their season. Plus, they've got players in Japan, players in France, players all over the bloody world. You know, they're the Arsenal of the world game, really, in many ways, South Africans across the globe. But, you know, the URC season should be the basis of their season. And they've got their internal Curry Cup competition. It strikes me that's enough, surely. If all these top players are so tired,
Brent,
pump
maybe
up the Curry Cup a bit if they want a bit more of a showpiece down in South Africa.
Maybe it is. And maybe what happens is that you know, I mean, these one-off games are a sort of mixed blessing. But maybe, you know, if that happens and they get a URC champion or they get a Curry Cup champion, maybe they play the European champions, you know, and so there are permutations. I don't know what is deemed these days to be financially required in terms of how many games they play in order to get the broadcast revenue and get the gate revenue. And that's where we sort of come unstuck with these things, because you can see quite clearly that what's happened with the European Cup is that there are more games for more people, but that the quality of it has been driven down.
Yeah, 100%. And it means these sort of titanic clashes that on paper we're getting, because let's be honest, Toulouse versus the Sharks was a little bit of a damp squib. Brendan, you said how much you were looking forward to it, and unfortunately it fell short of that. You never know which version of any team, but I suppose it's been true of the Springbok sides most this year. You know, between 3 clubs, they lost 6 games in a row between them. It just means
the absolute basic core problem here is at a time where there's a good degree of rugby takeoff in Spain and Portugal, where Georgia continued to knock their heads against a brick wall. Whoever thought the concept of European Cup was dead? European Cup should be back having its glory years. There's no need for South Africa in it. It would take a few years to adapt the format to get your Spain team in, get your Portugal team in, maybe even Netherlands. The Netherlands are coming on. Reboot as a European Cup. Have a URC with South African clubs in it. I'm happy with that, but it's just one commitment too many for the South African teams. Trying to be sympathetic to them here. It's one commitment too many. That they are only human.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, look, guys, I do want to talk about Sione Tuipulotu and the impact that'll have as a sort of last port of call for today. But English matchups, because this is the last time we'll mention Champions Cup till after the Six Nations. We've got Leinster versus Harlequins, Toulon versus Saracens, Northampton versus Clermont, Toulouse versus Sale, and Glasgow versus Leicester. How many English sides are actually winning? Is it 0 or is it 1?
No, I think that Northampton can certainly beat Clermont.
They're my one. I think that's it. I think it's home wins.
I mean, Saracens might get the better version of Saracens, and they might give Toulon a match. But you'd have to have the better version because Saracens are so inconsistent this year.
100%. You got to make a case for there to be 2 wins, but it's quite a hard case to make, isn't it?
It is, and there are some pretty tasty fixtures, aren't there? If you look at it, La Rochelle Munster screams off the page, doesn't it? Given the Rog connection.
Remind me who. That's the headline fixture. Remind me who Bordeaux are playing.
They're playing Ulster. Oh, that could be a cricket score. How Ulster are anywhere near the last 16 just is an insult to the tournament.
It tells you everything you need to know about the current tournament.
Yeah.
But that could be 50 by half time.
Unsightly, yeah. Okay, guys. Sione Tuipulotu is out of the Six Nations. Torn pectoral muscle, which could be a matter of weeks. It could be, eating into his time ahead of the Lions tour of actual on the pitch rugby. First of all, from a Scotland perspective, obviously they can rekindle a Glasgow Warriors partnership in Stafford McDowell and Hugh Jones, but they're back to co-captaincy, which didn't work. They've lost their other talisman alongside Finn Russell. Brendan, that's pretty much the worst news they could be hoping for 10 days out from the tournament.
It's bad news, but I don't think it's terminal or calamitous. Firstly, in passing, where do all these pectoral muscle injuries come from? We didn't have them in the game 15 years ago. Is this Gym Bunnies going mad? Or it just seems a very, very common and quite serious injury these days. It tends to take like 6, 8, 10 weeks, doesn't it? Pectoral muscle, if I'm right. So listen, it's unfortunate. I think Scotland are incredibly well stocked in the backs. Rory Hutchinson, to me, is a guy who should already have 50 caps. McDowell is a very fine player, a bit more physical, so it might be they see him as the like-for-like replacement in midfield. So in one way, I don't think the Scotland backs lose that much. But what Scotland do lose is the direction that he gives. He is that hard physical man in midfield who offloads. Stuff revolves around him, second phase, third phase. And he's clearly a good leader. He immediately stepped into that role and you could see he was having an influence. So they're missing out on the leadership. Somebody's going to have to step up. I don't like this co-captain. I'd rather see Scotland say who the captain is. You be the captain. I'm not that despondent in terms of the backs. I think Scotland have got 2 back divisions that could play Six Nations rugby pretty much. Yeah. So I wouldn't. And so many times we boost, we give Scotland the big up and they disappoint. Well, okay, they've had a few little knockbacks this week with injured players, and it's maybe taken a little bit of the pressure off, a little bit of the steam off. And who knows, this might be the season with a few knockbacks that they actually put a run together. We'll see. But I wouldn't be too despondent if you're a Scotland fan. Yeah,
I'm interested. Their midfield permutations don't seem to me to be empty either. McDowell's obviously strong, unproven to a degree, but I'm interested in Tom Jordan.
Definitely.
I think that he's somebody who could perhaps play at 12. And the other guy that you've got to consider, because he, as I remember it, when Scotland found the key to unlock England in Edinburgh last year, Cameron Redpath had a significant influence in it. He's not getting much game time for Bath at the moment, but he's certainly a player that you wouldn't count out. So I think that they do have. There was a time when you'd look at the loss of somebody like Tuipulotu and you'd think, that might jam them up badly. But I'm not sure that this time it's going to.
Yeah. I think it's the leadership piece that is probably the main barrier for Scotland, especially as I think Finn Russell plays much more freely when he's not got the captaincy proverbial armband around his arm, and Tuipulotu is that glue. He's formed a sort of fairly impenetrable midfield partnership with Hugh Jones to the point where prior to that injury they were maybe my line starters, the 2 of them. That in itself is obviously a loss because that's a 3-year partnership now that continues to get better.
Who's captained Scotland before? Gilchrist has certainly captained Edinburgh for quite a while. I think Darge has captained Scotland, hasn't he?
Both flankers, haven't they?
I think Darge's only ever been co-captain, hasn't he?
Okay, co-captain. I don't know. Listen, I mean, I'd sooner see captain in the back row or in the pack anyway. So look, he's definitely a loss, both in terms of what he brings in terms of leading from the front to a Tuipulotu. But again, if they can get over the loss of him positionally, if you like, they can certainly get over the loss of him in leadership terms. They've got enough players who've been around for long enough to be able to pick up that mantle.
Well, at the very least, from a British Lions perspective, we hope it's no more than the 8 weeks Brendan mentioned, because a torn pec can be double that quite comfortably. So let's hope that's the case. Brendan, we won't see you next week, but I look forward to receiving your Six Nations predictions.
Are we doing every match in advance as we normally torture ourselves?
We're doing every match in advance. Yeah, I can't wait for you to back Wales to beat France in Paris.
And what's the scoring system these days? Do we get extra points for being close? I've never understood the scoring.
I'll go
You sort of refuse to reveal the scoring process.
Yeah, and I just somehow won every year.
I think Ollie makes it up as he goes along. That's what happens.
That's called podcasting, Nick. We got Jerry Guscott coming on for our sort of annual Six Nations preview next Tuesday. So definitely don't miss that one. But Bren, we'll probably see you in a couple of weeks after the opening round.
Good stuff. That'll be after the Italy win, the Wales win, and the England win in Dublin. That'll be an interesting podcast.
Yeah, that would put the cat among the pigeons.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks for listening to this week's edition of the Rugby Paper Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe on whichever podcast platform you use and recommend the show to your friends. The Rugby Paper is available to buy every Sunday, and to make sure you don't miss it, subscribe through our print, digital and online options at therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions. That's therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions to get all our content for as little as 14p per day.